Now, this is one of those videos which is definitely easier to talk through than it is to write the slides for. It truly is. It's one of those scenarios where you look at it and you go, well, surely that should be quite easy. Surely, that should work. But the slides for it just don't come together well. So I'm going to apologise now. The slides are not as good as I would like them to be. They really aren't. They are better than they were when the first couple of drafts, but they are not as good as I'd like them to be. With that being said, Beatty of the Mediterranean. Now, this video is actually being recorded before I do the live, but it will be coming out a week after live. So, what is the point of watching both? Why is this a premiere as well as the other one was a live? Well, because when you do something which is a really cool topic, one of the tricks to make the algorithm in YouTube really happy and promote it more is to make it a premiere rather than a recorded video just going live. Now, that's something you have to think about more when you're below a certain level of viewers. Because the trick is, and the really important figure to get the algorithm to boost it up, is you have to get over 300 viewers in the first hour. If you can get over 300 in the first hour, you do well. So, that being said, that's why this is a premiere. Because it should hopefully get to over 300 in the first hour. So, Beatty of the Mediterranean. It is an alternate history question. But it's actually a really interesting one because, to me, it gets into a lot of the strategic command decisions being taken and the absolute mess of command that was going on in the last couple of months of 1914. The fact is, you have, and I've discussed this in videos about Mountbatten, about the various commanders involved in this period, about the whole Fisher. Well, in many ways, Fisher was conducting an operation to get himself put back in charge, to take over from Battenberg, to take over that role. And Battenberg, of course, changed his name later on to Mountbatten, but leave that to one side. He's really doing campaign against him, and Battenberg is pretty much being circled by all sides by everyone trying to push their own candidate to replace him, and he can't get his staff to do their job. And I talked about that before. Well, this is one of those situations where actually this could have come out that mess, and actually possibly should have come out even if it hadn't from that mess, because it would have been almost sensible to do some of the things that we're going to be discussing. And you're going to work that out very quickly once we start working through, and you're going to sit probably with me and go, well, we're talking about Beatty to the Mediterranean, but there are lots of other options that could have been sent, and it would have been sensible to, and you can just realise just how much of a strategic mess, once you start looking at alternate histories, just really does reveal just how much of a strategic mess the Royal Navy were in the last 6 months of 1914. They are a massive mess, and that's mostly because of all the fighting going on in the Admiralty. So let's start off with Beatty's career. Now, Beatty has a very regular career, and honestly, I can expand this full screen. You can maybe zoom in and see bits, but to get the entire career on a single slide, it's interesting. It truly is. If you make the columns narrower, they can fit the words, but that doesn't really help. You expand the words, it doesn't fit on a page. It's just annoying whichever way you play it, basically. But the important thing for us, the important dates for us, are those around July, August 1914. And, in that period, he is Rear Admiral aboard HMS Lion. He's put in that position in 1st of January, March 1913. He's promoted acting Vice Admiral on the 3rd of August 1914. He's still an acting Vice Admiral right up until the 9th of August 1915. He's an acting Vice Admiral. So that actually makes his deployment and movement around more interesting, because he's both senior, but not so senior. So actually you can deploy in places where you need to diplomatically. And he's had quite a good experience so far in his career so far. He's been Naval Secretary to the First Lord. He's been decorated for being wounded in action. He has had several good commands, and he's had several interesting operational experiences. He's not a bad officer. And as I often point out, Beatty is actually not a bad officer as a ship's captain. He's fine as that. And he's actually got enough political power and acumen as First Sea Lord. He does quite well as that. As long as you don't mind the fact he doesn't take the first opportunity to get the fleet air arm back under control and all those things, and some of the compromises he makes on the Washington Treaty with the Nelson and Rodney. But we'll leave that to one side. If you leave those decision making to that, he's quite good as First Sea Lord. He's certainly most politically powerful candidate the Navy could have selected for that period. So he's the one who's most able to basically ignore the politicians and do what he wants, because they don't want to take down Beatty. Because taking on Beatty, he's got such a political machine working for him. But his problems are in wider fleet management and his desire to charge at the enemy and not necessarily coordinating with his seniors. Now, that's a problem at Jutland, and that's a problem for the Grand Fleet. In this scenario, charging at the enemy and not necessarily communicating with seniors could actually be a good thing, because half the problems that come about in this pursuit are because of the Admiralty interfering and having bright ideas. Half the problems come about because of that. So that gets things moving along in an interesting manner. It really does. And then we carry on to, well, let's say he is deployed. Who's he going to be deployed out there? Let's say, and my rough idea would be the end of July 1914. Milne, Admiral Milne is in charge. He's a fine officer. I want to say this. He's a fine officer. But he's not going to go against his orders. He is very much the officer you want in command of a station which you want to control very closely from home. But that means you need to give him very precise instructions. You need to give him no room for latitude, because he'll always convert it latitudinally in the most conservative direction possible. You give him any freedom for maneuver, he will do the lowest risk option. That is what he will do. Every single time. And that's fine. That's not necessarily a bad officer. That is a useful officer to have in the right posting for them. The Mediterranean, 1914, is not necessarily the right area for him. But under most circumstances, that's actually quite a good officer to have in that region. Because especially as he's got a lot of experience, he's very good at diplomacy, he's very good at talking to other powers, he's very good at getting them on side, and if you consider the agreement that's going with the Entente at this period, that the British will defend the North Atlantic and the northern coast of France and take control of that, and the French are going to be taking control of the Mediterranean, do you really want to, how to put this politely, send one of your better independent commanders to go off and be used by the French? Or do you want to send someone who'll do a perfectly good job but won't really lose anything? Might not win anything, but probably won't lose anything. Who are you going to pick? Now, Milne and Beatty's relationship is not massive, but they do have some relationship. They do definitely know of each other, and having Beatty come in as sort of a deputy commander, a second in command, would probably help Milne out quite a bit. He has Trowbridge, who's a good rear admiral, but this would give him a vice admiral, a rear admiral. It's senior officers to play around with. And that might sound really strange, but basically it's a case of, I can send this person as an independent command here and leave them authority to act, and this person is an independent command and authority to act. You've still got quite a large vein of senior officers in the Royal Navy who cannot adapt to the policy that will then appear by World War II, where you have captains going off and being expected to act independently. They are still too many of them from the Edwardian era Navy, which was obsessed with the Admiral gives command. So the thing is, they are deploying the admirals to be in charge. Things that these days we would tell senior captain to go off and do, maybe a commodore in World War II, maybe a senior captain, commodore, sometimes quite junior captains actually. If you're a captain, you're expected to do it. They would want to send a rear admiral for. So this gives him another vice admiral. More importantly, this would also give him a fourth vessel of the battle cruiser line. And I do want to differentiate between battle cruiser 2 words and battle cruiser 1 words, because one of the trouble that you often get with people is they jump straight from battle cruiser 1 word to fast battleship, and therefore for them there's only that break. Once you realize there were the original battle cruisers, there was a gap between the battle and the cruiser, and they were the economic warfare, and they were battle level cruisers rather than battle cruisers. You start to differentiate them far more naturally into what they are. And it's like when we're talking about the various ships are being built and the various vessels being built, we have to differentiate. Are they designed for the economic warfare spectrum, scouting spectrum of the role, in which case they are probably a battle cruiser, or are they designed for the fighting raiding spectrum of the role, in which case they're a battle cruiser? There is a difference. And it goes battle cruiser, 2 words, battle cruiser 1 word, fast battleship, and battleship. Let's just go with that. And basically, as they go from that end to that end, the subdivision gets greater, the armor coverage gets greater, the armor thickness might stay the same depending on the generation, but the area the armor covers will get different. It's, how do I put this politely? Okay, so the difference is a battle cruiser is carrying a shield. They've got a shield, and they might have a helmet, and that's it. That's their armor. When they are a battle cruiser, 1 word, they probably have a breastplate as well. They might have some leg coverings to protect various key points of them. Fast battleship will have coverings over most of their body. Battleship will be full plate armor. And so that's the differential you're talking about. That's what you're talking about, and you have to think about that when you're talking about these ships. Now, the reason I'm bringing that up is because the Mediterranean, all the ships in the Mediterranean are eyes. They are all battle cruisers. The German ships, which we'll be talking about in a bit, are all battle cruiser 1 words. They have to be. They're second-line battleships in some regards. That's what they're being treated as. Different from how the British treat their ships and how the British originally were designing their ships. So the thing is, you can argue there is a need for reinforcement there. And these two could get along, because this one will do the dash and ignore the Admiralty and ignore him if he needs to, and this one won't rock the boat because he's got political connections, so he will just be upset by it and go, whoa, he's not listening to me. But he will then accept the glory if Beatty brings home glory. But if Beatty doesn't bring home glory, don't worry, I've got the signal which said I was telling him not to do that, so I'm safe. It's all his fault. And this is where it comes into that whole battle cruiser ship differential, because when we expand this out, in 1914, you have Indefatigable, Inflexible, and Indomitable attached to the Mediterranean. You have Australia out in the Pacific, sort of Pacific Australia area. And you have Invincible, New Zealand, Lion, Princess Royal, and Queen Mary all sitting in with the various sections of the home fleet / what's going to become the Grand Fleet. The North Sea, for the Germans, that's got Von der Tann, Moltke, and Seydlitz, but it's not got the Flinger. That doesn't come out till it's commissioned in September 1914, but as we all know, the British carry out all their tests and everything before they commission a ship. The Germans commission a ship and then carry out its final testing. So, whilst it's commissioned in September 1914, it's actually not really available for operations till November 1914. So there's technically 3 German vessels in the North Sea, and there's the Goeben in the Mediterranean. Now, for the British, you have Tiger being commissioned in October 1914, and Queen Elizabeth being commissioned in December 1914 as well. So they are 2 vessels to consider in this, because you know they're coming if you're the British. So sending Lion one of the battle cruisers to the Mediterranean, whilst it can seem a massive drop, it's actually not a drop, because the Germans have 3 vessels in for the Kaiserliche Marine, whereas the Royal Navy would still retain 2 battle cruisers and 2 battle cruisers. Which would mean they'd still have a 4-3 advantage in ships. And they very quickly would have Tiger coming along, commissioned October 1914. So that's going to be in service about the same time as the Flinger. And you can also, if you want to, rotate back some of the battle cruisers from the Mediterranean after you've reinforced them with Lion, or Australia when she comes back. You know, there are options coming in here. And the point is this. Doing this can net you killing a German battlecruiser. Now, what's the advantage of this if you don't want one of those 3 wandering around the world? And I will be talking about what is actually a worst case scenario than potentially even joining the Ottomans, although joining the Ottomans was seriously the worst case scenario for the war, probably the war as a whole. Even though these scenarios, though, are terrible. You don't want either of those scenarios to take place. So stopping it is worth it. And the guaranteed stopping it would be any 2 of the Infallible, Inflexible, Indomitable. Any 2 of those could do that, guaranteed, against Goeben. But Lion could also do it solo against Goeben. Lion is tough enough, big enough, powerful enough, mean enough, hard enough. They could go 1v1 versus Goeben and could whip it. And the thing is, the cruisers and most of the other, especially the armoured cruisers out there, they're mostly 23-knot ships. They can't go fast enough to catch her. She's a 25.5-knot ship. Lion's a 27.5-knot ship. Sending Lion out is very useful. The fact that Lion comes out with a vice admiral, an acting vice admiral, who is going to be slightly more aggressive than Milne, is another reassurance. And it's a good way of reassuring Fisher, who has been moaning non-stop about his appointment, to the lovely and one and only Churchill. It would be enough to reassure him that, you know, things are going to be handled well. Yeah, look, we've sent out Beatty with Lion. Mediterranean is going to be fine. We're going to secure the Mediterranean. We're going to sweep the German presence from the Mediterranean very quickly. Once we've got it sealed up along with the French, then we will draw the battlecruisers back to the UK. And you don't want to send battleships out to the Mediterranean. You don't. You want to keep those back for fighting in the North Sea. That's where the German battle strength is concentrated. That's where their force is. Now, yes, it does reduce your numbers by 1 in the North Sea. But that's not really a problem. And the battlecruiser fleet hasn't been set up as a separate force at this point. It's still very much an attached reconnaissance force of the Grand Fleet. Or at least in the ideas and the theory it is. It's not being deployed south to the Firth of Forth or anything like that. So this makes quite a lot of sense from a strategic perspective, because Goeben can cause a lot of trouble. You can say that's with hindsight, but that's also with sight than that period. You do not want Goeben breaking out from the Mediterranean into the Atlantic. You do not want Goeben going and joining up the Ottomans. You do not want Goeben joining up the Austro-Hungarians. You do not want Goeben doing any of those things. Those are all bad scenarios. And yes, I've just tipped my hand on what other worst case scenario is. Goeben going up and joining up the Austro-Hungarians. Because then Goeben's backed up by the Tegetthoffs. And by actual sustainment and supply and logistics and industry which can actually support her. Which can actually maintain her. And if she can be kept up to full speed of 25.5 knots, then she can do some interesting things in the Adriatic. That's 5.5 knots faster than the Tegetthoffs. But what are the main options, therefore, for BT joining? And there are These are the main options. Milne keeps everyone together. Milne splits up. That's it. Those are the options. Those are the options we'll be covering primarily in this video, but we'll talk about some other options as well as we go through. And there are forces and against for all this. Milne keeping everyone together means he keeps the most strong and powerful force. But it also means you have the Admiralty in control as it historically was, telling him exactly what to do and keep making mistakes, and having different people in the Admiralty sending out different instructions, which is confusing everything and causing problems. One of those people sending out the different things and instructions is, of course, Churchill himself, but also it's the First Lord of the First Sea Lord, Battenberg, is trying to send out instructions, and other people are also trying to send out instructions because, that's what you really need in a war, in this kind of complicated situation, is lots of different people trying to act like they are the chain of command. It's just what you always want. It's what everyone wants in wartime. That's what you want. You want about 60 different people trying to issue instructions to the person who's in charge in the theatre. And they're going, whose instructions do I follow? There's also the possibility that Milne splits up. He covers the Gibraltar route with Inflexible and Infallible, sends Indomitable coal, as she did historically, because she needed the coal, because the boilers, the Three Eyes kept having trouble with their boilers. They hadn't been necessarily getting the best quality coal. Their boilers kept silting up, and they kept having work on them, and leaves Beatty in charge of what was historically Trowbridge's force. So historically, you have Trowbridge, who's in charge of 1st Cruiser Squadron, which has 4 pretty nice armoured cruisers in them, but they're not really matches. Even as a group, they could theoretically be a match, but that's as long as they catch the Goban. And they're going to take losses, and Trowbridge is not the sort of commander who's going to willingly charge into battle to take losses. He's not going to do that. And the 9.2-inch guns are best going to achieve a mission kill rather than necessarily a direct kill. So they might take out the superstructure, take out all those things, make Goban functionally useless. So wherever she limps into, she ain't getting out from. But if you've got Beatty in charge of that, and you've got Lion, suddenly you have 4 armoured cruisers to back up Lion. So Lion's got her pals. That can change things. And with that all said, it's time for the Shameless Book Plug. For those who don't know about the Shameless Book Plugs, they're what I do in pretty much every video. For those who do know and want to skip it, there should be a thing down below which allows you to skip it. There should be parts. I do try and label them in these days, when I have more time. I really need to get myself someone who likes to put in timestamps to things, so I can just go copy and paste them from other people doing that. No, that'd be incredibly lazy. But no, Shameless Book Plugs are basically me letting the academic side of me fly, in that I'm a British academic. Someone wrote the other day, I don't agree with it being publish or perish, but I do understand it's publish or perish, and you need to. In the UK, it's sell books or perish. It's not publishing. It doesn't matter how many books you publish, it's how well they're selling, and that they keep selling. So I have more books which I'm hoping to come out soon. My book, the main delay in books is always in the UK, and I think this pretty much goes for most history books around the world, is actually the cost of purchasing pictures and picture rights. Because whilst you might have a friend who's got a whole host of pictures they will happily give you, and you can use them for the vast majority of your pictures, it'll be the 5 to 10 pictures you need to buy for something like the Imperial War Museum, which are going to crush you financially. To be honest, this book has been for sale now for a few years, and it hasn't yet paid back the cost of buying the pictures for it that I bought for it. And I bought about 20 of the pictures in there. 25 actually, I think it was in total, out of the 70 odd pictures in there. I bought, and some, quite a lot of the rest were either already I had access to them, or they were from Drac. The 25 I bought there cost enough that book, despite selling several thousand copies, being on its second edition, still hasn't paid back those pictures. people ask me what's the answer, what's the thing that's stopping history books being published, what's the thing stopping books being published on a topic I want and love, I want a history book on. Usually the answer is it's not the people willing to write it, it's the there's people willing to get the picture, pay the pictures for it. That's what's producing the book. And this is why doing with YouTube videos, I tend to use Wikipedia pictures, because I know that I have the rights to them, or video pictures that come from the files I already have the full digital rights to. Not just the rights to publish in a book, but the rights to use on computers. Because otherwise you get copyright claims. And, you know, you have to be careful with these things. So, yeah. Thank you to everyone who supported the channel. Thank you to everyone who makes the channel possible by being a patron, by super chats and super thanks. And thank you to everyone who does all that, because part of the money that comes in, and I've been quite shameless recently that most of the money coming in is going on calyxes and fitting out my new office and making sure that works, because I have been planning on building it all myself from scratch, which I had the money set aside for to buy the materials for. But with pneumonia and having to deal with everything else and juggling it all, that's not going to wouldn't happen for years now. So to get it set up quickly, I need to buy stuff like these lovely IKEA calyxes, which are great. I really love these IKEA calyxes. There are some, like this one over there, which is a present from Naval. He literally gave it to me from his garage. But there are some which are new ones, which you've all paid for. These two. And there are more coming. And they're useful for the amount of books I have, because, you know, being a historian, it's light on the books. But yeah, that's all thanks to your support. And the publication rate of books, that's also thanks to your support. Because, believe it or not, even when I'm earning, being able to put money aside in the sheer amounts that are needed to pay for the pictures, if you consider how long it takes to pay them back, that wouldn't be as possible as quickly as possible at the rate it has been possible to do so without your support. So thank you. And to be honest, the book was actually published after the channel went live, and this book originally, some of the pictures were paid for in here by people kindly donating. I don't know what those academics do who haven't got this kind of resource. I think that's the reason why you get some books produced which have literally got 5 pictures of them. Because that's their option. They don't want to put in books which are just huge blocks of text and the whole way through, but that's the only way they can afford to put them out. So, the historical pursuit. Now, in 1914, I'm going to start off with the fact that Kaiser Wilhelm had ordered that in the event of war, Breslau should either raid in the West Mediterranean or break out into the Atlantic to try to return to German waters. And to an extent, the British have this information, so that does structure some of the British thinking. And why do I say the British have this information? Because there is no reason, considering the way the information was transmitted, the British should have been able to get hold of it, but also there is no other way to explain some of the British decision-making process and its obsession if they do not have some of the information about Kaiser Wilhelm's orders. And his orders come by a different methodology than the later orders, which come from Tirpitz and Admiral von Pohl, which instruct Souchon, who's the admiral in charge of the force. He's a contra-admiral, a version of a rear admiral. It's what they used to call rear admirals in Germany at this time, and still is actually used by a few navies today, so it's a contra-admiral. To sail to Constantinople. So you've got these 2 sets of orders. I'm reckoning the British received one, they didn't receive the other. Because otherwise, there is no reason to disregard some of the information quite so blatantly they're getting from their own cruisers, who are spotting them, about all the results. On the 3rd of August, when they received the orders of the knowledge that there's been a declaration of war against France, they go and bombard Philippeville in the French Algeria and Bonn, also in French Algeria, in accordance with the Kaiser's orders to go and do that. And then they start heading for Constantinople. They could not reach Constantinople without coaling, and so they headed for Messina. Now, the really interesting thing is they actually counter the British battle cruisers, Indomitable and I think it's Indefatigable. Yes, Indefatigable. At 10:32 hours on the 4th of August, Tuesday the 4th of August, about 4 hours after they've done their bombardment, which was also on the morning of the 4th. But it was before the British had declared war. So they lose contact. And on the 5th, Goeben managed to arrive at Messina. And the Greek premier has meetings with various people. Souchon starts singling Athens, asking for coal. On the 6th, the German collier Bogoros loads with coal and is released by the Greek premier Venizelos to go and refuel the Goeben and Breslau. They depart Besna and Messina. And then on the 7th, Trowbridge intercepts the ships. Now, Trowbridge Squadron, which intercepts them, is 1st Cruiser Squadron. There are 4 9.2-inch gun cruisers, 8 destroyers, a light cruiser or so with them. They're good ships, but their top speed is 23 knots, so against the 25.5 knot when it was designed, possibly 26 knot by some claims in terms of actual operation, but probably reduced to roughly 24.5 knots by the various boiler issues it was having at the time. Ship that is the Goeben, it can dictate range, and the Breslau, which had a starting speed of 27.5 knots because it was made with the British battle cruisers in mind, it really is okay. So they can keep ahead of them. They can dictate range, and this is why we don't get a Battle of Cape Matapan in Friday the 7th of August. Now, the British, and there's all sorts of intelligence and information going back and forth, but then on Saturday, the 8th of August, Milne leaves Malta with his battle cruisers. And you think, Malta is just there. So his ships have roughly speeds of 25.5 knots, 25.8 knots, there's a debate on them, but they're not that much faster than Goeben when she's in full operation. Again, this is where a Lion would have, with 27.5 knot speed, would have really come in useful. Now, at this point, Milne gets sent a signal from the Admiral Superintendent of Malta. Following from Athens begins. From strength of signals, Goeben thought to be near Syra. No indication of direction provided. But let's be honest, Syra is over in this direction. And then there was a message to Milne from Athens. Bogoros is in Austria, is Austrian, proceeding to Salonika. Okay. There's also the Russian Admiralty. They're also getting information from the Russian Admiralty to the British Naval Attaché about the Goeben and Breslau being in the Aegean. And then there's various signals start coming through, and this is all on the 8th. At 12:58 hours, they get a signal to Milne from London, from the Admiralty. Commence hostilities at once against Austria. Then at 14:50 hours, negative, my telegram, hostilities against Austria. Acknowledge, urgent. Then 17:19 hours, with reference to the cancellation of telegram notifying war on Austria, situation is critical. Okay, what's happening with Goeben? We're always supposed to be doing Goeben. And then signal from London Mill. In view of the Admiralty previous telegrams, I am not following Goeben into Aegean Sea. This is signal to London from Milne. I'm not going to follow the Goeben into the Aegean Sea. They presumed at this point they'd get a further message from the CNC from Milne, and then there's a further signal received in London from Naval Attaché St. Petersburg. Russian Admiralty informed from Athens, Goeben and Breslau passed Matapan morning of the 7th of August, steering to northeast. That's an issue. Then you're now on to the Sunday the 9th, and it just gets worse and worse and worse, with more and more different people getting involved and giving instructions and ideas of where it's going to be. And Milne doesn't pass Matapan till midnight of the 9th of August. At which point Goeben and Breslau are pretty much on their way to and almost at Constantinople. So yeah, it's a mess. It's a mess at several points. There's lots of instructions and various points that are on as you can see from the tracks. They are ordered to go back and forward, and there are prior instructions which are given to Milne on the covering of French convoys, on not engaging the superior forces, which he's passed down to his sub-commanders like Trowbridge. There are all sorts of things here that they are instructed to do, and realistically, here is the thing. The only superior forces you could find yourself fighting with the Austrians, and if the Austrian fleet comes out in full, and you need to be instructed to not engage those superior forces with your battle cruisers, then you're a bit of a moron. But by giving that and that going down, you suddenly have all these commanders having this reason they don't engage them. But there again, there is a legitimate reason not to engage them. Because you shouldn't be engaging with the aim of getting your forces wiped out. But that is a course made by the person who's in charge on the spot. Whether they think they're going to wiped out or whether they think they can just about pull it off. So, let's start off with... what are the consequences if Milne keeps everyone together? Well, realistically, nothing changes. If Milne keeps Lyon and Beatty together with his force and basically keeps them as attached to the hip as he physically can, then nothing can happen. Beatty can't even use his speed to race ahead and go, well, I can do 27.5 knots. Now, Milne might order him to do a race ahead, 27.5 knots, when he starts heading in the right direction. He might do that. There is a possibility. But Milne also spends a lot of time hovering around the various points of the northern part of the Messina Straits to deal with the possibility of the Goeben going west, heading for Gibraltar, heading for the Atlantic, heading for home. So he could that's where he could be keeping these heavy units. He could be keeping them there because that's where he thinks they're going to be. Either way, it doesn't really change much about the history of the events and battles because unless you allow Lyon off the leash, there is no chance of anything catching the Goeben and Breslau. Now, if they're doing roughly 24.5 knots, which is my strong suspicion, considering the damage done to the boilers and keeping together, 27.5 knots means that she's gaining on them at 3 knots an hour. That's a long way to catch up. But again, Lion is a newer ship. Tiger isn't in service yet, sadly enough. Lion is a newer ship. Lion is a ship which is due to go into refit early in 1915 to have her boilers and everything properly cleaned and thoroughly inspected. So there is always the chance that someone gets particularly reckless and thinks, well, we're going to be fixing and doing work to these boilers anyway. Let's rock and roll them. In which case, she's already a faster ship to begin with. That could crack on a bit of extra speed. Now, I realise this is always a supposition, and I realise that some people are deeply unhappy with this idea. But let me put it this way. Navies, when they're designing ships and they're giving stated speeds, they're giving you what their safe operating capacity for is in peacetime. So what you're operating it's safely at in peacetime when you've got a significant margin of error and everything should be safe and it's going to maintain the engines in the best quality and easiest and cheapest to maintain, because overall in peacetime there is no real need to push everything to the limits and actually push it to the point at which you're really going, oh frigate. But in wartime, kind of like the same when it comes down to the drill rules for when you're firing your guns. Please do not fire your guns over the turret in front of your guns, because it could cause damage to the sighting mechanisms and everything, and we don't want to do that. So in exercises, you don't do that. when you're doing gunnery practice. You don't do that. In battle, the enemy is that way. Well, that's when the potential cost is justified by the potential ends. You may cause damage, you probably won't, but you may cause damage. But you're more likely to cause damage to the enemy if you fire over that way. So you do that because it's worthwhile. And it's the same with engines. There is no benefit to going to pushing them to the actual nth degree as fast and as hard as you can, unless you've got an enemy you're hunting down who you cannot let escape. But if Milne keeps everyone together, that's going to be a tail chase, and that's going to be very hard. Now, here's the thing. If Beatty does do the tail chase, if he somehow gets away, that they could make Milne look better in the papers afterwards, because I try my best. For all the discussions going on, it wasn't my fault, it was the Admiralty's command fault. Thank God Fisher is coming back to take command. It'll be one solid voice. It will deal with all this confusion in the Admiralty. And yeah, I did send Beatty to charge after him, and he just couldn't get there as fast as he pushed the ship. In many ways, that would be more acceptable. At which point, Trowbridge would be required to try and keep as close a contact as he could, and guiding Beatty, and the cruisers, light cruisers, would be doing that, and it would be interesting, but who knows? There's a small chance they managed to catch up in time, but it's unlikely. So the immediate consequences are much the same. Milne, Trowbridge probably find themselves both no longer having active seagoing commands. Beatty probably finds himself... He probably doesn't get to blame quite as much because he was being held tightly to Milne's side. But what is going to be interesting is what happens afterwards on that one. You see, if he avoids the blame using his very special clout, he might even get made to Vice Admiral properly more quickly. But that's going to depend on whether he's recalled to the home fleet, in which case it'll probably be the same as it was, but he won't have the lustre. He's just come back from a defeat. He's going to be even more eager and even more reckless when he's back with the battle cruisers back home. And of course, if Doveton Sturdy then returns from the Falklands with a glorious victory, there could be a whole debate about who actually gets command of the battle cruiser fleet. Because remember, Beatty's only an acting Vice Admiral at this point. And is till well after the Battle of Falkland Islands. Sturdy could be made a Vice Admiral for his victory. In which case, that could change that hoops and who's in charge, and could have all sorts of ongoing things. And this is the joy of alternate history at this point. I can't really tell you what happens, because it's going to depend on a lot of other things at play. There is also the other option that he's given the charge at command of Sackville, that originally goes to Admiral Sackville Carden, which is command of the Eastern Mediterranean forces. Specifically, Gallipoli. Now the thing is, you have heard me talk about how the problem with the first attack was, in many ways they were taking losses, but also they didn't press hard enough. If you're going to do something foolish like they did in the first attack, you have to go in and be prepared to take losses. Now, most admirals are not going to do that. Most admirals have sense and love for their people and will think things through and be not wanting to do it, and will suffer like Sackville Carden did from so much pressure and responsibility that he ends up being almost sick-noted out of there because of the mental pressure. Beatty has just the right level of ego and competence that he actually might think he's doing a Nelson and do it. And the realistic point to say is, if those ships do get through to Constantinople, or do manage to force their way through to Dardanelles, and we know how close they come historically, if they manage to get through anything through to there, it could be enough. It might not be enough, but it could be enough. And if this is a Beatty seeking to get revenge on the Goeben, which has derailed his career, and get to Goeben, Especially with Queen Elizabeth sent to assist him. Do you really want to bet against him trying his best to push his way through? As hard and as fast as he can? Using other ships as basically sacrificial shields in front of the Queen Elizabeth to get her through, knowing that as long as he gets her through to Constantinople, one blast of her guns in Constantinople will fall because of the way the port, as in the PORTE, of the or the court of the Ottoman Empire is set up and running at this point. It's nuts, but he might do it. Which leads us to the point of view of consequences for the wider war. Either he destroys a fleet, trying to push through to Gallipoli if he's in this trials, and pushing through to Constantinople, or he wins. Either he makes this 100 times worse because the sheer amount of forces which will be needed to send to salvage the British honour and British status, or he makes it not happen. And by the way, if he achieves it, there are some other serious problems which come through in that, but he's definitely going to still take over from Jellicoe when the ground fleet needs a new commander. It's definitely going to be Beatty because he's won this glorious victory. Leave aside the fact that if you knock out the Ottomans from World War One and you start supplying the Russians, there is an argument as that you could shorten the war by up to 2 years and have an Allied victory, because of the resources able to be devoted to it, and because of the fact that roughly 90% of Russian trade goes in and out through the Dardanelles at this point. So it goes even higher once you look at all-year trade. Especially agricultural trade and food imports. This is a really critical area for the Russians. So there you go. Keeping them close can end up with basically the same historical events, consequences of Milne and Trowbridge as historically happened, more than likely. But for Beatty, it could turn into ignominy in the Grand Fleet, or potentially glory, or disaster, in the Mediterranean. Those are his options. Those are realistically his options. It's not going to be anything in between, it's going to be one or the other. But what happens if they split up? Now, this makes things a little bit different, but there again, it makes it kind of interesting. You see, if Beatty is left with Trowbridge sitting opposite the Aegean, to stop not Adriatic, more than Aegean, to stop Goeben and Breslau going that way. And as we know, Trowbridge does historically manage to meet up with Goeben and Breslau. The thing is, if you have the meeting coming up, now those 4 armoured cruisers with their 9.2 inch and 7.5 inch guns and a 23 knot speed, yeah, they're still not doing much more than they did historically. Although they are doing a lot more than they are historically, because now you have Lion. And Lion can hit the Goeben. And she can crack her. And in the nicest way, if it turns into anything like a battle where they're actually engaging and fighting each other, it's not going to be conducted at 24 knot speed. It's going to be conducted at 22, 21 knot speed. The reason I say that is because the damage on the Goeben is basically she can go as long as she can go in a straight line and keep going. When she starts to maneuver, it's going to affect her. It's going to slow her down. To an extent, the same is going to happen with Lion, but not as badly, because she's overall in a much better condition at this point. Which means suddenly those 9.2 inch guns come into play. And if you're Goeben, if you are Captain C. Ackerman, or even, let's be honest, Sasho, um, in charge. Even if, any of the German officers, are you going to go, you know what, that 13.5-inch gun battle cruiser that's blasting away at us, no, we shouldn't concentrate on that, we should concentrate on the 9.2-inch gun cruisers, because we can easily beat them. Yes, you can, but whilst you're shelling at them, that means Lion basically has a practice shot to shell you. That's not good. If you're making it their life to be a day of target practice, they are going to hit you, and they're going to keep hitting you hard. If you don't engage them, though, then that means you're not going to engage 9.2-inch gun cruisers. And the thing is, whilst people do look at the stats of the armor and go, well, maybe they can't penetrate, if they get close enough, they can penetrate. If you get close enough, those 9.2-inch guns can start hitting, can start hurting, can start working. So, the thing is, you're left in a catch-22. And yes, you've got some 20-inch torpedoes, but those aren't going to be enough to hold off this whole force. This is a nightmare, and they've got their own destroyers. They've got 8 destroyers of them, which trying to find out the names of which destroyers were involved is a very difficult task that I'm still tracking down. I've got sources out. I have books somewhere, but I think they're actually in the boxes still. It's really annoying me. The boxes the few boxes I've still got down here immediately that are on my immediate list to open. Could be in them. It could be in the longer term list of boxes to open at the back of the room, or it could be in some of the boxes upstairs because I found some of the naval history books I've got mixed in with some of the fiction books and the science fiction books. But we'll leave that to one side. They're in a box somewhere, which has a list of destroyers. This is not a good scenario. So how does this happen, though? How does this happen for the Germans? Well, let's be honest, as I said, Trowbridge, even with all the mistakes at command, gets into that position. Finds himself in a position where he is facing, where he is sighting, where he is able to engage, and is trying to engage, and he wants to engage. And he doesn't engage because the time passes and he can't catch them in time at a suitable point. Again, I refer you to Lions, 27.5 knots top speed. They ain't getting... That is not a scenario they're getting away. They can pull away from a 23 knot ship force. They're not pulling away from 27.5 knots. Well, the Breslau might. She can do 27.5 knots. So she could keep the range at a constant. But then she's got to leave behind the Goeben. And if the Breslau... Let's be honest. If the Breslau escapes into the Constantinople, no one's going to care. She's got 4.1-inch guns. She's a baby-like cruiser. You have anything sitting around out that entrance of the Adriatic that she runs into, she's in trouble. It could even be a couple of town-class cruisers. She will be in trouble. She is good, but she's not designed for a heavy fight. It's Goeben which is the problem. It is Goeben which is the problem. And it will be a nasty fight, but it won't be a particularly long one, because what will happen is the 30.5-inch guns will start to tell. They'll get some hits. Lion always had fairly good gunnery in terms of her accuracy. Chatfield was as obsessed with speed and rate of fire as Beatty, but Chatfield was also quite good at getting some accuracy out of his crews. And again, if Goeben decides to fire at the cruisers, then it's a practice shoot. If Goeben doesn't decide to fire at the cruisers, well, it's the Mediterranean. It's slightly calmer than the North Sea at this point, and they'll be racing along. They'll keep firing until they hit. And they can dictate the range. They can dictate the pace and angle of engagement. They can dictate what they want to do when they want to do it. Goeben can't. And the moment Goeben gets slowed down, then you've got the full pack on you. That's when you have the 9.2-inch gun cruisers coming in. That's when you have them taking their wear. And you're just going to end up with a forest of shells coming towards you. So with that as the case, what comes from this victory for the war? Well, if Goeben is sunk quite so convincingly, that might change some of the things on the approach to the Ottomans. One of the reasons why that tips the Ottomans in favour of joining the Triple Alliance is the fact that they seem like they are going to win, and they've given them these huge naval assets when Churchill had seized the Ottoman ships being built in British yards. Whilst the Ottoman Navy had been pro-British, the army had been pro-Germany, with the Navy losing what had been publicly subscribed funded ships, funded by public subscription. It kind of embarrassed them. Then the Germans turn up and give them these two ships, especially the good old Goeben. Oh, that's a high status asset. Now, the reality is, with Goeben not making it to Constantinople, and Broslow, well, it's going to depend. Does she leave her battle cruiser behind? Does she leave her admiral behind? Or does she stay and fight? If she stays and fights, she's dead as well. So there's a good chance she dies, because she seems to have quite brave, quite hardy captains as a rule. So there's a good chance she dies. But she might try and get away. You got something in your ear. Sorry. Off to check ear on the poodle. From such a victory, well, Milne's going to, of course, be considered amazing for his foresight in in dividing his forces so, and covering even where he wasn't told to cover. Even though it's probably quite useful for him to get rid of, let's be honest, someone who's hard charging off and wanting to do all these energy things, and frankly isn't listening to much to him anyway. Beatty's won a glorious battle. That's going to firm up his command of the battlecruiser forces. He's going to be revered as the first battlecruiser victory of World War I, the first great battle. Honestly, from the British side, no one comes out badly in this scenario. Trowbridge probably gets a promotion as the Rear Admiral who commanded 1st Cruiser Squadron and did so doubtfully in this action, supporting Lyon. There's not going to be any of the recriminations. There's not going to be any of the court proceedings or any of those scenarios which went on historically. That's just not going to happen. So if that doesn't happen, that changes quite a lot of legacy of this period, because one of the things that happens in World War I is usually during the wartime, British officers come closer. The admirals and naval officers come together closer. Politics gets put aside, factionalism gets put aside because they have to work together. One of the problems you have of A, the divisive scenario for the First Sea Lord, and B, the divisive scenario for that comes out of this, and also the loss of Coronel, is that you have a naval force which keeps being in factions, keeps fighting itself for a lot longer than it probably should. Here's the thing, though. This has just been a victory. This has just been a great victory. And the thing is with victories is the glory tends to grow up. So, A, it's going to make Churchill look good, but also it might even give Louis of Battenberg a bit of peace. Because, remember, this is going to take place in August. Historically, he doesn't go till October, the 28th of October 1914. So, this is August, there's September and October. And the thing is, I would add to, if you've won this battle, if you've won against Goeben, and sunk Goeben, then you've got Invincible. Well, no, you haven't got Invincible, have you? You have the Invincible class, Inflexible, HMS Inflexible. You have Indefatigable and Indomitable. And you also have Lyon herself. Now, 4 ships all freed up from the Mediterranean because the Goeben is sunk, so you don't need any capital ships there to deal with, because there's nothing in there which is a fragment from the Austrians, and they're supposed to be dealt with by the French, and you don't really want to use battlecruisers to fight them anyway, to clear it for other things. So suddenly, one of those ships, any one of those ships, probably, let's be honest, it's going to be one of the eyes, can get sent to the Falkland Islands and get sent south. And would they get there in time for Cornell? Well, they'd have over a month. Cornell takes place in November. They'd ideally want to join up with the forces in October. Yeah, you can. With Goeben dealt with, you suddenly free up all these assets which are traditionally sitting in the Mediterranean. Traditionally, it's 3 battlecruisers, but on this scenario, there's 4. So you can send one of those down, quite obviously, to go down and reinforce the forces in the South Atlantic to deal with the potential von Space Force coming through. And then the Battle of Cornell will be incredibly different if there's a battlecruiser there. If there's a British battlecruiser anywhere near there, then that's going to be a very different battle. And that's going to give Craddock a very different outcome, if Craddock's the one in charge. Because it could be Trowbridge is sent with one of the battlecruisers as his new thing, because he's just been part of a great and glorious battle. Which would mean there wouldn't be a subsequent Battle of the Falkland Islands, because if there's a Battle of Cornell which involves a British battlecruiser, the odds are the Germans do not come out well. And the Battle of Cornell turns into them either breaking up and becoming multiple different surface raiders, which get slowly picked up either by neutral ports and turned, or by British hunter-killer groups finding them. Or even Japanese hunter-killer groups finding them. The thing is, the likelihood is, if you do not have the commitment of the Mediterranean, you will send at least one vessel down to reinforce Craddock. Especially if Battenberg, etc., are given a bit of peace by a victory. There's also then the thing of, do you need to do the battle, or do you need to do Gallipoli? If, as I was discussing earlier, it's a key, those 2 ships arriving are a key thing in turning the Ottomans to the Triple Alliance. If they don't arrive, well, that's one thing. Secondly, they might not turn. Secondly, there's the thing of, do you want to... There's no real incentive to go in there after them. And thirdly, if you do eventually have to go in there after them, it's going to be later. It's going to be after more fought, and it's going to be after they've declared war. So you're probably not going to turn up and try and rush with the Navy. You're going to turn up with the Army and Navy and do it properly from the beginning. You're not going to have the scenario you did have with Gallipoli. The impact on World War I could be tremendous. The impact on World War II could also be an effect, but we'll leave that to the one side. In terms of World War I, it's going to have a massive impact. And then, well, what happens to Beatty in this scenario? He's just won the first glorious victory. And then he's going to go on to command the battles he does historically command as the battlecruiser force commander. He could well do well. He could do very well. And if he does do very well, what's that going to do to him? Well, First Sea Lord, definitely. But it's going to make his political position even stronger. Now, it's probably not going to be helped by whatever happens to Jutland, because I can't see that going that much differently. The only difference you might have, which I could see potentially coming from this, is Beatty could get a habit of seeing everyone else around him being his supporting acts, and therefore wanting to keep them with him for the supporting act. There is also the possibility that because he does so well, he gets given independent commands, because, he really needs to be off commanding fleets himself around the world, and if there does end up being some sort of campaign in the Mediterranean like Gallipoli, send him out to command them. That's always a possibility, but honestly, he wants to be with the battlecruisers, he wants to be with the action. That's what he loves and zest for, and he'll probably use this victory to get himself in there. It would just give him far, far more status. And historically, it might even change some of our opinions of him. Not much, probably. Probably it's going to be like the other battles. It's going to be a case of he's good when he's able to fight a fast-moving battle on his own, and it's just him versus the fleet in front of him, and that's all he's thinking about. And nothing goes wrong. He doesn't check his command signals, so if he's commanding more than one ship, this turns out to be a problem. And he doesn't coordinate well with people above him or below him, which is also a problem when you're coordinating larger forces. But this battle will have completely played to his strengths and shown him in his best light. It will have been pretty much a 1v1 fight with ancillary forces looking on and being part of it, but mostly being ignored. That's what Beatty's dreamed of. That's going to be Beatty's glory for the rest of his life, pretty much. That he's did this. And I know I'm saying something nice about Beatty, but it's true. This will not change much of the course of World War One. The only really big thing it could change is where HMS Queen Elizabeth is during the Battle of Jutland. She could well be still still the Grand Fleet, because she might not have had to go off to do her Mediterranean service. It might well change where the Lord Nelsons are. They might again be with the Channel Squadron and Channel, reinforcing down there in case of German attack down there. And there's all sorts of other assets which might not be in the Mediterranean. Because, let's be honest, if you're just conducting the historical operations without Gallipoli, without those sort of operations, a lot of the heavier assets don't need to be in the Mediterranean, from the British perspective. Unless they are reinforcing the Italian and French forces versus the Austrians, which realistically they shouldn't need to do that much. They're probably going to need to have something there to do it, but, you can afford for it to be not that much. Please note, for those wondering, I have squirted and cleaned out his ears with the special stuff we had to clear it out of, basically very pure water, and put his medicine down there. He's not happy with me now, hence I'm getting the cold shoulder. So here's the third option, and I did think we should discuss this. Now, we often don't consider this as an option much, because the Kaiser's order was to break out to the Atlantic, and the Tirpitz von Paul order was to go to Constantinople. But the third option is to go to Austria. The third option is to go, completely go their own way and go to Austria. And this should be considered an interesting option, because if this had happened, if they had managed to break into the Adriatic, then you have a problem sitting in the Adriatic. Now, whilst I don't consider battlecruisers a very good system to have if you're such a surrounded nation and you're wanting to break out, if we consider the Hartlepool and other raids which the German battlecruisers historically did against the British, then imagine what the options are for this vessel, as in the Goeben, to be used, supported by Tegetthoffs, in the Adriatic. The thing is, if it's causing trouble, the only real thing you've got that guaranteed to stop it and stop it causing trouble is one of your battleships. But you send your battleships up there, sending them into perhaps a trap where these are waiting. The Tegetthoffs. And the fact is, the Regia Marina has 10 ships versus the Kaiserlich and Königlich Kriegsmarines 9 battleships. That's pre-dreadnoughts, dreadnought-style ships combined. Goeben makes it 10v10. Now, yes, I know she's not a match for any of the Regia Marina's dreadnoughts, but they're pre-dreadnoughts? And then supplying, refitting her, keeping her in service, that's That's easy. The Kaiserlichen Königliche Kriegsmarine can do that. So that would cause an interesting scenario to develop, especially for the Italians. Might it cause them to join the war earlier? Might not cause them to not join the war at all and stay neutral, with the British and the French having to maintain some Otranto patrol between them. I don't really know an answer to this question. Could do a lot of research, a lot more research, and I might come to the same conclusion I have roughly in my own head now. I might not. But my current view is that if this had happened, what you see is a far more cautious approach by Italians, but ultimately the same approach by the Italians. And more importantly, it doesn't have the same impact on wider British operations. You probably still don't get anything going on in Gallipoli and still don't get the Ottoman entry into the war. Not under the same circumstances. There is options. There's certainly a likelihood. It's not impossible for the Ottomans to join World War One on the side of the Triple Alliance, even if they don't get the Goeben and Breslau. It's not impossible. But it's far less likely to happen when it does, and it's far less likely for the British to be quite so, how to put it, aggressive with them without that as an incentive. Yes, Churchill had handled the battleships badly. But there were options. The Foreign Office were working through them, and these things needed to be given time to work. Goeben and Breslau took away that time with their arrival. Austria changes nothing. It just gives Austria a slightly stronger hand. Austria-Hungary a slightly stronger hand. It gives them a slightly more powerful presence, and it gives them another ship, which is honestly going to cause the Italians nightmares, but secretly, for the British, it's going to be great because it's a ship which is off the board completely strategically, as far as they're concerned. The French are going to be taking the lead of blocking in. Maybe they're joined by the Italians, and all the British have to do is occasionally provide support. That ship's not going to cause them any trouble supplying the Russians. It's not going to cause them any trouble with the Ottomans by making them feel stronger. It's not going to cause them any troubles in the North Sea by being a strength there. It's just sitting there. And yes, you can go, well, what happens if it breaks out? The thing is, the Straits of Trento are narrow enough that it's going to be very difficult for even a 25.5 knot ship to break out. We're not talking about a full-on battlecruiser here, and this is again one of the interesting things, because as I said, I usually give the definition of a battlecruiser is they have to maintain contact with the cruise line, which means they have to be roughly 28 knot ships. The cruiser line, when the Invincibles came into service, was the speed they could do, 25 knots. The cruiser line works up, and then from about World War One onwards, pretty much from just about before 1913-ish, the World War One onwards sort of period, the cruiser line is accepted to be 28 knot cruiser line. That's the speed. Battle cruisers have to maintain contact with the cruiser line. So if they cannot do that, they're not battle cruisers. Fast battleships also have to maintain contact with the cruiser line. That's in pretty much all the definitions which various admirals are using in the 30s when they are talking about them, but it's also crucially used in the definitions which are used when discussing Queen Elizabeth and the Queen Elizabeth class. And the fact is, their speed was originally settled for would have been just about enough to maintain contact with the battlecruiser line as it was in 1912, but wasn't by the time it was revised up when they realised that cruisers needed to go faster to be able to do their job in a world where the battleships could maintain the speeds they could. So, yeah. Life gets fun on these stories and these pieces of history. So ultimately, what's the summary? And I did avoid putting Beatty's head here. The summary is not a straightforward one. You see, there are many options in this. Most of them, though, have to be considered short-term. You see, with alternate histories, there is only so far you can go. Sometimes that's years down the line, because this change, you can follow it through quite logically, because it's going to change X, Y, Z. But in a fluid moment like a massive war, where there's lots of X happens, so Y happens, so Z happens, etc., where there's lots of things interlaced and interwoven, and there's lots of decision making going on, and it's very febrile, you only can really go short distances. I can say that Beatty's absence from the North Sea for a couple of months is not going to affect things dramatically. Honestly, not in that period. It's not until you have the fleet split up and the battle cruisers based separately to the Grand Fleet that you actually have a big difference taking place, and you realistically need Beatty. That Beatty's going to have a bigger personality difference. And if he's just on detached command as an acting vice admiral, that doesn't really matter. Now, if we think about it in terms of the actual events themselves, well, the likelihood is the Ottomans will still probably join the war eventually on the side of the Triple Alliance. The thing is, it might take them till about 1916 to do it. Instead of them being attacked in 1915 by the Allies, it could well wait a long time for it. And the thing is, I doubt the Ottomans are going to be dramatically improving their situation if they haven't been attacked. If you consider the sheer amount of work which goes on between the first attempted naval operation and naval invasion of Gallipoli and the later operations, the fact that it needs to be done, and there's German officers around to do it, is in many ways thanks to, and German officers around to assist in it, let's put it this way, and often to be used as cudgels to bash over the head over officials who do not want to spend the money, rather than because the generals don't know what they're doing, to me means that I don't think there's going to have any vast amount of work done in that period. The only thing I think that happens is if it happens later, then the Allied intervention, when it comes in, is going to be more organised, because it's going to, instead of being a rush, it's going to be a case of, oh, they've done this. What's our plan? Our plan is this. Oh, good. Execute plan. Now, interesting enough, that means that Churchill is actually probably in the First Lord of the Admiralty office for longer. It probably means that still the issues go on with Fisher, and I wouldn't be surprised if Fisher goes out at the same point. Let's be honest, Fisher causes trouble because he really does want to be Admiralissimo. But he might stay in longer still. It is the Dardanelles, it is Gallipoli, which ultimately gets rid of those two, and anything which doesn't cause that is going to have consequences. There's also the whole Coronel not leading to Falklands Islands, the battle. And if the Coronel is not a loss because there's a battlecruiser there, that again changes the approach to battlecruisers. It changes their view of them, especially in terms of economic warfare and their ability around the world. Why do I emphasize this? Well, it might change how other nations make their decisions in terms of what ships they're funding, what classes they're pushing forward. It might change them in decisions in terms of what they fund post-war. Again, all of that is a cumulative experience. And the point here is this, is Beatty, who is normally not always the most useful person to put into a fleet in a subordinate or even a command role, is actually kind of the perfect officer to have around this point. He's a senior officer who's actually better for one-on-one ship fights, and who will ignore people's orders if he thinks it leads him to glory. So with that in mind, today's question is this. I want you to go through history, and I want you to think of admirals who you think are bad. And I want you to think about, well, hang on, what battles might they have actually, what other situations might those traits which make them bad admirals for this scenario, and the scenario they found themselves, actually made them very good for, or actually very useful for. I'd love to hear your ideas on that. I'd love to hear your ideas on that. And what else we got? Well, pneumonia recovery schedule is still in the file. We're through that. We are through that, but I will say this, to next Thursday's video, please note it's going to be a premiere, it's not going to be a live. The reason it's going to be a premiere is because I'm going to be suited and booted, and at a dinner. That's the 17th, and I'm looking forward to that greatly. I'm going to be at the Maritime Foundation dinner. I'm with some of my colleagues from Shipshape. We're going to be having some fun times, and who knows, maybe Drac will win the award. I'm up for it as well, but let's be honest, I'm Drac's one of the people if I win it, it's entirely a fluke, or they just all happen to be massive fans. I don't know. But as I mentioned earlier, what am I working towards in bookshelves and funding? Well, originally the plan was to get 7 Calyxes, which I've sort of got listed there. I have now, and I had 3, and so the idea was to get up to 10. I now have 6 in here, 1 upstairs, so I have 7. And I've ordered 3 more to arrive this weekend, or rather 2 more to arrive this weekend, I think. And the odds are I think I'm going to need about another 6 to 8. Yeah, it's looking like I'm going to need more Calyxes than 10. It could be worse. But yeah, that's the books, and thank you for all your support, because you're one of making this possible. Lots of little Calyxes, lots of Calyxes coming in. This room is basically going to be a sea of them, and the reason I've gone for Calyxes again instead of Billy books is because I think they're better for taking heavy duty books because of their internal strength, but also I can have them sitting in the middle of a room like these are. These are not up against a wall, and that one there is not up against a wall. And they don't have to be tied into the walls. They can be for extra support, but they don't have to be, and that's useful for me. Also, to address those people worrying about the hammer above my head, it's a good 2 inches in on there, and it's held in place by various things which are sitting there which you just can't see, so don't worry about it. It's the Orca is armed with a hammer though, because the Orca is going to do some work. I'm not sure whether that work is of a positive nature or a not so positive nature, but the Orca is off to do some work. Do not get in the Orca's way. Anyway, what we've got coming up next. On Tuesday we have Soviet Naval Aviation, and the following Tuesday we have the Charles de Gaulle, an evaluation. That should be fun. So, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you found this useful. It's been a premiere. I will probably be, as we speak on this video, it's supposed to come out on Saturday. I will probably be doing a Twitch stream right now, because I am probably doing a Twitch stream, or let's put it this way, after this, because I am trying to get my Twitch skills up and my gaming skills up, because as part of the Historiathon, which is going to be happening at the end of November, dates and timings to be announced, I'm going to be doing some gameplay, including World of Warships. Wish me luck. Of course, you Ultimate Animal Dreadnoughts, and I'm not sure whether I'm going to do another multiplayer game where I can play against you, or a game against the computer for the third option. I'm still deciding. Right. Thank you from me. Thank you from the Poodle. Take care, and hope you enjoyed. Yes, you're cute.